Would The Legend of Zelda still be legendary if it launched today? How do the classics hold up against the heavyweights of today? And what can modern gaming learn from the past? Without alienating our AMD users, can pixelated sprites outshine photorealistic and ray-traced worlds? Let's take a look at the timeless appeal of gaming classics versus the technological gems of the modern today. Was gaming better when more was left to the imagination?
Welcome to the Gentleland show, where we talk about game development, design, and culture. It's your access to all things in the games industry. We're your guides.
Hey, I'm Jacky, founder of Gentleland, computer scientist and digital artist.
I'm Edwin, a composer, sound designer, and opera singer.
Hey everyone, I'm Sam, a business and marketing expert and a co-founder at Gentleland.
Was gaming better when it left more to the imagination? When I think about the games that defined my childhood, names like The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, or Super Mario, Final Fantasy, these are games that come to my mind. I just remember how I loved playing Roller Coaster Tycoon, and these classics really hold a special place in my heart. Not just for their gameplay, but maybe also for their cultural impact. I remember sitting in front of a PC together with my friends, building the wildest roller coasters ever. If nostalgia is the ultimate cheat code, are we giving gaming classics too much credit in the face of modern innovation? Modern gaming offers so many alternatives. I'm thinking of Path of Exile 2, I'm thinking of Marvel Rivals, maybe even Elden Ring, Cyberpunk. They have in and of itself already become timeless classics, but do they hold up to the classics of the past? And what can modern gaming learn from the past? What's more important, nostalgia or progress?
I think that hits the nail on the head, because it is very difficult to define what exactly a classic game is. For some people listening, maybe it's Pong, maybe it's Tetris, or Doom, or Pokemon, it could be World of Warcraft, or even Minecraft, some of the younger listeners. What exactly makes a game a classic, and is there any kind of official definition? Frankly, I don't know. But for that matter, how would we also define modern gaming? Like Jacky just said, it could be Elden Ring, or like Cyberpunk's not even that new anymore. Does that now count as modern gaming? But I think something we can all agree on, unless you're literally 5 years old, is that sometimes a low-budget, older game, simpler game can be way more fun than something that's modern, super realistic, and super high budget. So why are some of these simpler games so entertaining, and why do some of these really massive, epic games just kind of fall flat to us?
What's really exciting to me about classic games is really this discovery aspect. Maybe this was just me being a kid and not knowing how anything worked, but classic games to me always had this curiosity and surprise element to it. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what the game was trying to convey to me. There was no instructions. There was no hand-holding or new player onboarding tutorial or anything like that. It was just like everything was so random to me. And I think that's also part of what makes classic games kind of by definition classic, because they came in a format where when the developers would ship the game, they couldn't edit or revise or have any updates or hotfixes to the game. When they loaded a game onto a disc or a cartridge, that was it. When it was shipped, that was it. Versus now, you get a game and it could be patched, it could be hotfixed, and there's all these different things that kind of go into that. And I even kind of like wonder, does that have to do with the way developers are choosing to like hotfix games on the fly? And I think a lot of like the curiosity in these kind of like older games come from like random Easter eggs or random cheat codes. An old game that came out in 1997 was GoldenEye 64, where you had to like complete levels in various difficulties and beat a level within a certain amount of time. And when you did, it rewarded you with like a cheat code that you could activate in the menus, and it would do stupid things like give you a bunch of guns or infinite ammo, or it would make your head really big and your arms and torso really small, or all the bullet holes turn into paintball mode and have all these rainbow splatters and things. And so as a kid, and I think about classic games, I always look for these really strange occurrences like cheat codes or Easter eggs. Versus in modern gaming, I'm kind of looking forward to a really complete interactive hand-holding experience where really end game is kind of like you being given godlike capabilities to unlock all these quirks about the game.
I feel like classic games thrived on simplicity. You had all this limited technology, and developers in the 80s and 90s had to really focus on tight mechanics and really innovative design. Has something been lost in the evolution of gaming? Are they maybe even becoming too complex for their own good? I think about games that have layers upon layers of gameplay mechanics interwoven into each other. And just as you just said, Edwin, just look at games like Tetris. They are elegant, they are minimalistic. There's a lot of power in the simplicity there. Super Mario Bros., for example, it taught players everything they needed to know about the game in its first level without a single spoken word, right? So these limitations led to pure gameplay experiences that kind of remain timeless. As you just mentioned, we have basically from Pong to Elden Ring, and the landscape of gaming has shifted so dramatically. And the tools that we have available as developers today can create, like these breathtaking worlds. And then you have suddenly a game that can be overwhelming, where you place it with game tutorials, which, with all the UI elements and systems. And while I feel like there is beauty in this complexity, like you can craft these really rich ecosystems like in Red Dead Redemption, have these massive skill trees as in Path of Exile, it's coming at a risk of losing accessibility, I feel. And maybe the answer lies in the balance between innovation and restraint.
Yeah, you make a good point, Jacky, because I'm genuinely concerned about the state of modern video games because we're talking about these basic and current methods of software distribution and development. Classic video games, like I was saying before, had to be rigorously tested with quality assurance, and because once you ship a game on a cartridge or disc, you could not patch it. Versus now, you could do an update, you could do a hot fix, things like that. It's not to say that modern game developers are lazier, so they're just going to release crappier games, which, unfortunately sometimes they do. But they also have the tools and means to build these more rich, beautiful, detailed, innovative worlds. And with this additional complexity, we are able to leverage all these new features and all these new things. And so, I guess my real fear is not necessarily that modern devs aren't going to provide a robust game on launch, but, it's really about what are devs going to do and leverage these new tools so that there's sufficient polish for players to receive a great experience on launch.
I think that's all true, and players these days are so demanding to see innovation, and especially if a game's been marketed as some sort of big budget epic, we're very hard to impress now. I think there is this case probably of diminishing returns. Like, the tools have gotten really sophisticated. It's easier than ever to make a game and to make it look realistic. So you're always just trying to push the envelope further. Like Jacky was talking about, there's a slight shift away from an objectively good game and then a subjectively good game. Because an objectively good game these days, I think, is something that looks really impressive and makes use of technology. I'm not sure we cared quite so much about that when we were younger. That's a contentious statement. I have nothing to back it up with, but I'm just not sure I cared so much by whether my, Game Boy game looked more realistic. I never compared the graphics of Pokemon to Turok. It would be weird. They both frankly don't look real. I think we're all agreed a massive budget and impressive technology, though, it doesn't actually necessarily make an enjoyable game. Anybody can take huge amount of enjoyment from some of the early arcade classics. It's just these cool gameplay mechanics taken as far as they can go, and they are so easy to understand. If you have access to a gaming convention, they often have some of these retro games readily available for you to play there. I guarantee you, some of them are super difficult, but you'll know exactly what you're meant to be doing in half a minute, perhaps. And I'm actually concerned about that accessibility. I've seen a whole bunch of people who aren't really gamers try to pick up a modern game and they have no idea what to do.
This reminds me of a fun anecdote. During a games convention where game developers were showing their game, there were some younger generation players that would come up to the booth and not know how to interact with the consoles. So they would try to touch the monitor because they would just anticipate it's a touch screen, but in reality it was just, so they had to teach them how to use a keyboard and a mouse to play the game. It's like these types of experiences, I feel, that are indicating almost at this concerning shift in gaming culture, where you have this way of how communities form today versus in the past, and how in this classic era you could play with many, many people across the world on the same server. Like going back even further, multiplayer gaming meant gathering with friends, sharing a single screen, and creating these really fond, loving, bonding moments over, like a bowl of chips, or how you would say, Edwin, crisps, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah. And these really intimate moments, I feel like are a bit lost, Like sometimes you still have them, but I feel like they have become increasingly rare today. When I think of online multiplayer, it enables a global connection. But let's also be real, often at the expense of local ones. Since gaming has become this billion-dollar industry, while capable of delivering like these groundbreaking masterpieces, it has also normalized pretty troubling practices or, like brought them more into the focus. I'm thinking, like relentless crunch culture, exploitive monetization strategies, and really just being able to deliver unfinished or deceptive games, the way it feels like, oh, wow, I just got scammed. And these issues, I feel, were not so present in the past. And when I think about this, it feels like there's a tension between the old and the new and what is driving games forward nowadays. Classics remind us of the magic of simplicity and focus, and while modern games show us the possibilities, it's also about the possibilities of technology at scale. The idea to continue exploring, the boundaries of what games can be. We as developers would do so well, I feel, to draw inspiration from both areas, the past and the present. I have been wondering, are soundtracks of yesterday the orchestras of today? How does music bridge the gap between classic and modern gaming?
Music in games has changed a lot. Older soundtracks had these massive technological limitations that you were just talking about. It also extended to the music. Depending on the hardware that the game was on, there may have only been available for the soundtrack 3 up to 5 sounds at once. So you couldn't have 6 sounds at once. That's not a thing in the 8-bit era. Then in the 90s, you could start to have something like an MP3. So you could start playing back recordings. And that's really the first moment where you can actually just have a modern orchestra on your soundtrack, or pretty much anything that sounds like modern music's going to have, well, probably a lot more than 5 tracks on it. I've written plenty of game music where there could be quite literally 100 sounds happening simultaneously, and it's just not possible on this older technology. So that's a starting point, but I think there was actually a lot of charm and ingenuity in these older 8-bit soundtracks. These limitations encouraged a lot of invention and I think creativity. And composers couldn't write in a super immersive, realistic, if you like, epic style that's popular today. That means that the soundtracks were generally melodic, they were quite catchy, full of character, and generally quite memorable. They were also quite quirky. This music probably also had more space to be interested because the games themselves didn't tell you everything there is to imagine about the game. There was some emotional and imaginative space that gave the soundtrack a bit of space to fill in. Now, in the 2000s, I think soundtracks have slowly begun to move away from these slightly more attention-grabbing soundtracks. Our technology's improved. We can make something that sounds almost like a complete orchestra just inside a PC, completely electronically, and the fashion's been for more and more immersive soundtracks. And these are soundtracks that you don't really notice happening, but they're definitely improving your experience of the game. But I think it might have gone a little bit too far, or rather, sometimes it's taken too far. Because in some newer games, I just miss the charm and memorable themes that earlier game music had. Some people listening might also find it easier to compare, for example, the soundtrack from films of Jurassic Park to Inception. They're both great soundtracks, but from Inception, I can literally just remember like the sounds. Jurassic Park lives on much more richly in my memory as a whole selection of musical moods and pieces, and that's really what I'm describing here. Inception has a super immersive soundtrack, which you often don't notice. In Jurassic Park, there's lots of moments that, the film's not focusing on hyperrealism. There's lots of moments that have a lot of space just for a soundtrack to tell you this is the emotion and to spend some time with that.
The technological limits of classical games compared to what we're able to experience in high resolution or high fidelity, kind of everything of modern gaming, especially I think we see that not just in visuals, but also in sound design. Super Mario on the Nintendo Entertainment System, you couldn't even know what instrument this 8-bit sound was trying to emulate. And they've obviously developed and worked very, very hard on that. Nintendo is who I'm talking about. When they released Super Mario 3, then Super Mario World, and and Yoshi's Island and kind of all these other games until we even get to even Nintendo 64's Super Mario 64. The soundtrack remained just as iconic, and that, I guess, audio or soundtrack or orchestral identity has carried over even today on the Switch. It's really hard to make an impression on players because even when we look at relatively modern gaming, with the release of Halo 1, the soundtrack for Halo 1 was already in that modern era of being able to have high fidelity MP3 sounds. And so what are you going to do when you have all those tools at your disposal? You're going to have this amazing singing choral soundtrack that everyone now knows and is very memorable for so many people around the world. I think it's good for players to go and revisit some of those classic games, just to experience what made those classic games so special. We're talking about old Super Mario, Final Fantasy VII, Chrono Trigger, old Legend of Zelda, old Street Fighter, stuff like that, Pokemon Red and Blue, StarCraft, Brood Wars, those things. How they've left such a mark as a pillar and an identity on modern gaming. And a lot of modern games don't even redefine those old things that have worked so well. They've just kind of polished them and upgraded them and remastered them to a modern context. And I think I shudder a little bit because I'm thinking about there's an entire cohort, an entire generation of players whose, to them, a classic would be Fortnite or Roblox or Minecraft. Look, there's nothing inherently wrong with those games, but I just feel that they're missing such a deep part of foundational gaming history that modern players maybe don't have to struggle through. But also these old classic games, what they've had to go through in their design limitations, have painted this foundational bedrock of what modern gaming is.
I actually think there's been a really good remake recently. I think it was Silent Hill 2. That's been very well received. And I haven't had the chance to play it yet, but I did play the original game, which is, to a modern player, it's very effective still, but it's janky. And part of the effectiveness of that game, I remember talking to a sound designer about this actually, is it's janky. There's bits that are quite uncanny valley, like the fact that your footsteps are on this kind of 5-sound loop. You notice that sounds are being recycled, and it sort of contributes to a quite uncomfortable atmosphere in the game. But it sounds like the remake has somehow treaded this line between respecting that original identity and then saying, but okay, we've got all this technology now, we're not limited by that anymore. I think that really takes exactly what you're talking about. It takes somebody who remembers what these older games were trying to achieve and understands new games, just from a game development perspective. And I think that's the crux of the matter. There's all this debate about, what can we learn from classic games? What can we learn from modern? I don't think one's really better than the other. It's just smart people or ingenious people making what they have available to them work well. And I think classic arcade games do have this magic and purity of design of their own. I do think that classic arcade games have this magic and purity of design of their own, which you don't tend to find in newer games. I've got very fond memories of 90s shooters. I remember playing them, actually, probably a few people do. Like, how on earth did we play those in person, 4-person split screen, back when TV screens were like 18 inches wide? But that's a case in point because it's changed even how the games are designed. We didn't have an aiming down sight mechanic really until about 2004. I think it was Medal of Honor that did it first. And if you imagine back then on a 4-player split screen, if your screen's tiny and you're aiming down sight, all you can see is your gun. You just can't even have that game designed. It's not even a technological limitation within the game engine or the console. It's like a completely other thing, just meant to a good design decision of let's let players see what they're shooting at. Sounds obvious when you say it like that. And I think older games just asked a lot of their players to fill in all of these realism gaps, if you like, with their imagination. But that's not a problem either. Like, any of you who have read a book will know imagination works. It's not an issue. So I find all of this quite exciting about the constant innovation in games. There isn't a perfect recipe to make a game, but they are always evolving, experimenting, and using ideas that are both new and old. They're building on what's come before.
What I find interesting is that there always seems to be a wave of genres that are a bit more popular than others, like a certain zeitgeist at the time. And of course, you have also all these debates of maybe even how characters are portrayed in games throughout all of these years. And maybe this is more of a reflection of society and art as a whole during that time. And when I think about that, these stereotypes come to my mind, where like a year or even 5 years, 10 years, we had different stereotypes and they existed all next to each other. And when we now go back to a game, we just sometimes feel like, oh, wow, these aged incredibly badly or incredibly well. And there are now whole websites dedicated just to collecting current TV and game tropes, such as, like common gameplay tropes or tropes related to technical aspects. And there are even a few common tropes which I found quite fun, such as maybe a more commonly known, the flipped sprite trope, where you think of all the different colors of slimes that you could have in a 2D game. Of course, from a game developer perspective, we just knew like, oh, wow, yeah, we could reduce the costs of our production by a lot just by recoloring images, right? That also meant, though, that if you had a character that had a scar or an eye patch or, was slightly asymmetrical, when you would flip them, they would have that same eye patch or scar on the exact opposite side now. Another trope that I found also quite funny is the completion mockery. And this is when the game mocks you when you complete it to 100%. This even happens in Zelda Breath of the Wild, and there you get a I have to out myself. Yeah, I've never played the game. But there is a Jesus gift, which you get by maxing out all of your stashes. And it's basically a golden poo with a game where the game gives you a note that it smells pretty bad.
Yeah, it's a very funny trope in Breath of the Wild because you go around the land connecting with all these little forest sprites and they give you this little golden nut looking thing. And you're like, yay, I got this little trinket, right? And you collect the trinket and you power up your inventory slots or whatever. But if you end up collecting all of them, which is quite a feat. The Hetsu, one of the characters there, the big forest spirit or whatever, ends up giving you this trophy that really means nothing. And yeah, you're totally right. The game also kind of trolls you a little bit with a note that says it smells pretty bad. So it's implied. And it kind of dawns on the player in that moment. It's like, oh, wait a minute, what have I been collecting this entire time? Yeah, that's very funny. I mean, I'm pretty excited about the new innovations in gaming, especially as gaming becomes more mainstream. I'm very hopeful for whatever concepts indie devs and devs are coming up, as we speak for new games. One thing that's been really interesting about new games is I was sitting on a plane just a few years ago and there was a kid, maybe 8 to 12, sitting next to me, and they were playing Kirby on the Nintendo Switch. To my surprise, they were playing a modern port of one of my favorite Kirby games of all time on the Super Nintendo called Kirby's All-Stars or something like that, or Kirby Superstar. It was basically like this random collection of Kirby mini games that was like remastered or rebooted, but it was a really fun, easy, lighthearted game. And I was so moved and touched by how nostalgic it was to see this little kid enjoying on the Nintendo Switch a game that I loved when I was his age. So it was a great sense of nostalgia. It was a great sense of relief to know that some of these classics are being rebooted, honored, mastered, ported over, and people are still enjoying them in new ways.
I totally agree with you here, Sam. Nintendo is really doing some interesting stuff when it comes to how they evolve their games over time. Pokemon is another really good example. There are so many generations that now grew up with Pokemon, and they all can connect with each other through this game somehow. And I feel like there's so much value in there just by having that intergenerational connection.
I think we're all talking about Nintendo now because they've always valued the kind of family market as well. So there's great economic reasons for trying to respect the old and innovate with the new. But they make very good games. And I think that's because they've considered this balancing act between what do we want to keep from older games? Is it the simplicity of design, the accessibility? And there's always this tension between refining those things that worked well and inventing completely new things. I think pretty much any healthy art form should have that. To be honest, I hope people just continue to discuss these trends and think carefully about what they like. What's your taste? I think the result is just better games in general.
I'm always looking forward into the future about these new gamer experiences and the new future cohorts of people that end up playing games and kind of interacting with a creative IP for the first time. I come from an era where we experienced Pokemon for the first time. We experienced Mario and The Legend of Zelda for the first time. We experienced StarCraft for the first time, Warcraft for the first time, before when Warcraft was an MMORPG, but was actually a real-time strategy game. So there is another younger generation that's experiencing Minecraft as their first thing and experiencing Fortnite and Overwatch and League of Legends, even Roblox. So even sometimes I feel like Minecraft is a really tedious and ugly game. I'm pretty sure the Minecraft generation would tell me the same thing about Super Mario 64 being a crap, tedious, and ugly game. Perhaps we're both wrong and right at the same time.
I think that just takes us back to that question, what makes a game timeless? I'm not sure there is such thing as a timeless game. There's just changing fashions and certain things that stay in fashion and certain things that don't. And at any one time, a particular person will have a particular balance of taste and might want to play that Kirby game on the plane. Or perhaps they want to stick with their Roblox. I don't judge. What matters is how the game feels to play it. And as games develop, even the nature of gameplay changes and the things they're trying to achieve and express also change. What I find exciting and very satisfying is it's not a restriction of possibilities, but it's actually just the possibilities broaden. So I'm excited to see where things go. I'm nostalgic for the Nintendo 64 and Game Boy classics you mentioned, but in the future, who knows how games might change more? I wonder, what will you miss and what will you look forward to?
For me, in the end, gaming is an art form, one that thrives on its past as much as its future. The classics were stepping stones that brought us to where we are today, and modern games are creating a new way for what's to come. Maybe the greatest game of all will be the one that seamlessly combines the best of classic and modern gaming. And if you feel the same, you can join the conversation by tagging us at the Gentleland on X, TikTok, and Instagram. We are also on Facebook and LinkedIn at Gentleland. Have questions or comments about the show? Send us an email to podcast@gentleland.net.
Be sure to let us know what you thought about today's episode, and if you're enjoying the show, please share it with your friends. It is nice to get nostalgic talking about all these classic games. So thank you for taking the time to join us for the Gentleland show.